tax cuts are great. They are helping small and large businesses alike, and they're helping the American people, many of whom are filing their taxes right about now. Okay, great, wonderful, perfect. But let's move on to other pressing issues like entitlement reform, which is a function of the $1.2 trillion deficit, which is a function of the massive $21 trillion debt, which is a function of the $200 trillion unfunded liability in this country. Tax cuts are peanuts, sorry, but they're going to be absolutely worthless if we do not get a handle on the debt. And what about repealing Obama-era legislation now, while Republicans can with the GOP majorities? Has Congress completely given up on repealing Obamacare, the most dangerous and destructive piece of legislation of our lifetime? Joining me now from the Capitol at Statuary Hall in Washington, D.C., representing Florida's 3rd Congressional District, Congressman Ted Yoho. Congressman, I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but aside from this bill that I think is going to be proffered next week, the so-called school safety, I'm going to address that a little bit later in the program. Aside from that, what exactly are the Republicans focused on? There's no message, to me, there's no cohesive message out there. There's no focus on the big picture, and this seems to be the inherent problem for the Republican Party, and that is a unified effort to advance the ball and do things that you all can get done now, because we don't know what's going to happen in November. Tax cuts are great. But, you know, I know you're working on a piece of legislation called Build, and this is a wonderful idea to streamline government. I want to hear about that. But is that going to move the ball over the goal line in November?
No, Graham, you brought up a great point there, and that is, you know, we've got a bunch of different little things that are going out. Of course, the hallmark was the tax reform bill. That was an awesome thing that's going to stimulate the economy, as you've already seen. The numbers are out there. But beyond that, we need to look 20, 30, 50 years down the road, and that's the thing that is short-sighted up here in Washington. What we're looking at right now is what we're going to do March 23rd to hopefully fund the government for a year, year and a half. But we need to look way beyond that to get our spending under control. And you brought up the mandatory side of spending. If we do not address the mandatory side of spending, and I've said this on other interviews, and they always say, well, the president doesn't want to deal with mandatory spending. I understand them saying that. But either this president or the next presidents either deal with mandatory spending, or mandatory spending will dictate to this nation of the programs that have to be cut, and they're going to be ugly. And so it's in our power to be proactive to do that, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's where we really need to focus.
Well, mandatory spending, in my opinion, Congressman, ought to be in the military. That ought to be the mandatory. Last I checked, that is the number one function of the federal government. But it's not just the president. I mean, this is going to take a group effort. It's going to take the United States Congress. After all, it's the Congress that holds the purse strings.
Oh, absolutely.
So, you know, you can't blame it on the president here. We have a mess, and my daughter's future is in jeopardy because of it. Now, I want to shed some positive light on what...
Not just her, but children's and generations from now are in jeopardy of this.
Real quick, your bill, the Build bill, you know, this is a step in the right direction. I'm not meaning to poo-poo it. And in essence, it's streamlining government processes, right?
Oh, absolutely. Right now, there's between 70 and 80 different federal agencies and departments that have some hand in foreign aid. And so it gets diluted, and it's a very cumbersome process. What this does, it brings it under one umbrella, and it allows us to partner up with other countries and bring in private equities or private investors to do projects in these countries that we want to have as allies, as trading partners. And that's the best way to create national security, is to have the strong national trading partners. And so this is something that will reform this. The other thing is, as you well know, what China is doing around the world in investing in these countries. Countries can't pay them back. They take over that property. This will help us compete and offset what China is doing. This is a national security issue, plus it's also great for developing economies and trading partners. If you look at our 15 top trading partners today, 12 of them were recipients of foreign aid. The goal of this is a paradigm shift, and that is to go from aid to trade. This bill will help do that and expedite that process.
And that's a wonderful thing, and you should be applauded for this, but this is just one small piece to the puzzle.
Thank you.
And part of the puzzle is making sure that the Republicans stay in the majority after the November election. This is going to be crucial, because we know what the Democrats are going to do if they can get in charge of the House once again. So I look at issues like the Goodlatte immigration bill, which, I don't know, it seems to be languishing somewhere in the ether of the House of Representatives, and then the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act, which I believe was passed in the House and is now languishing in the Senate. These are things that, if the Democrats take over, they're done, they're toast, it's never going to see the light of day. So these are urgent. But then I would also, Congressman, I would also throw in there some real big picture items too, like Dodd-Frank. Sure, parts of Dodd-Frank have been dismantled, but let's get rid of this thing completely. How about dumping Hart-Celler? I know that goes back to the 1960s, but Hart-Celler is the root of much of the problem that we have in this country. And how about going back to 1990 and repealing the legislation that created school gun-free zones? How about doing this? Not only is it good for America, but it would energize the base, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And this is something that you advertise gun-free zones, and that's where the mass murders, the majority of them, have happened, is where they advertise, hey, we don't have any protection here, come on in. And you're putting out advertisement where your kids are unprotected. This is something that needs to change, and so we look forward to doing that. You brought up about health care. The Obama health care policy is something that stifled our economy. We know that for a fact. The Republicans, we got in here, we dropped the ball, but we need to continue to dismantle it. Do you know today there still is, under the Obamacare mandates that are part of the legislation, that full-time work is 30 hours a week in this country.
Right.
That's a 25% cut to the average American out there. It used to be 40. That's something that should be rolled away. All those things, and of course, with the tax bill, we got rid of the individual and employee mandates. And that's been a big boom to the economy.
Speaking of the Obama administration, we have to give credit where credit is due. And one of the great things, they were terrific at getting a policy out there and then trying to sell it to the American people. And often they did a wonderful job of selling it and framing it to the American people. It's certainly not happening. It's just not happening. I know there's a lot of static out there from the mainstream media that's probably blocking some of the messaging, but it doesn't seem like there's a cohesive effort out there to advance the agenda that was aforementioned by me. And then you look at what's happening in the White House, and I want to ask you about this Gary Cohn and his departure. It is troubling for some people. It's troubling for the stock markets, but it's not troubling, apparently, to the president. Roll tape.
There'll be people that change. They always change. Sometimes they want to go out and do something else, but they all want to be in the White House. So many people want to come in. I have a choice of anybody. I could take any position in the White House, and I'll have a choice of the 10 top people having to do with that position. Everybody wants to be there. And they love this White House because we have energy like rarely before.
Okay, so the markets kind of tanked on this news of his departure, and then the president came out and tweeted, we'll be making a decision soon on the appointment of a new economic advisor. Many people wanting the job will choose wisely, and he did that, I think, probably to let the markets know, hey, I'm on it, and he probably will get a good person. But when you look at the big picture, don't you want stability in the cabinet for the President of the United States so you can move the ball forward, so the agenda can be cohesive?
Oh, absolutely. The business world and even us in our personal lives, we want stability, we want certainty, but yet with what the president has done, he's had a very strong language in the direction he wants to go. He's very, I don't want to say spur of the moment, but his message has come out. I'm sure there's a lot of thought about how they come out, and you're going to find the right match of the person that will take that policy and run with it. And I think he's still sifting through the crowd, and he'll find somebody that'll say, we'll take that, and they'll have the can-do attitude and get that done. Our trade imbalance is terrible around the world. With that trade, with the tariffs that he wants to put on there on aluminum and steel, some of those countries we really need to whack. Other countries, we need to go ahead and just adjust that so that we don't interrupt our production here. But if we have an industry in America that the American sources can't fulfill that need, we definitely need trade so that we don't have a shortage of that product. So instead of going in there with a sledgehammer to try to fix it and one size fits all, we need to go in there with a scalpel and just do the reforms that we need on tariff so that we build those trade relationships with our allies and make them stronger, especially at this time in the world when we see what China is doing around the rest of the world.
Yeah, and this all should be predicated on a free market approach, and for the most part, that's what we're getting from
Yeah,
this White House,
absolutely.
and we're getting a wonderful reduction in regulations. 22 cut for every new one.
Man,
It's a wonderful ratio. But tariffs.
That's probably
that is
been the biggest boom to the economy.
But the tariffs are going to have the opposite effect, and it's something we need to be very, very careful about.
Well, you saw how they came out when he announced it. The market dropped, and then companies say, "Well, this is probably not going to be as bad as we thought." I think for the price of a car, the average car would go up $45. The price of a Boeing 747 would go up about $350 to $400.
Sure, but it all adds up, right? So, it's called inflation.
Right, it adds
and
up.
you get into a tariff war. This is, we need to know our history. This is what happened in the 1930s. And we got into a tariff war. And of course, we know what happened after that. And George W. Bush tried it as well, and it failed. So we have to understand our history.
But if we don't adjust the tariffs, and if we don't adjust those things, the trade deficit will get worse, which puts us further behind. And so we have to balance that, and I think this is a great start.
I'm not worried about the trade deficit, Congressman. I am worried about the deficit and the debt and the unfunded liability. That, to me, is a national security disaster in the making. Congressman, out of time. Thank you.